Today's devotion is titled Emotional Vows, and we're on day 195, July the 14th, and today's morning rinse is Judges 8 through 11, and the featured verses include Judges 11:30 through 31. Japhath made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will indeed give the sons of Ammon into my hand, then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering." So making futuristic vows to God, other than our commitment to daily serve him, can sometimes be foolish. Let's be honest. I mean, especially in the heart of extreme emotion, when we are in that extreme emotion, we often take, that moment and our energy is very high and we say things that might not necessarily be the smartest things to say. But this is what Japhath did. And even though he was a warrior, he was a leader, and an amazing negotiator with his enemy, he made a vow to God that he no doubt regretted. He told God, if God helped him win the battle against Ammon, he would offer up whatever came out to greet him when he returned home from the battle, and whatever that thing was, he would sacrifice it to God. And he did not even consider the fact that it could possibly be his only son that would come out first versus one of his animals. And I think that he must have thought that, one of his animals would come out first and he would, because he didn't even use in scripture reference as whomever came out. He said what came out. So I think in his mind, he was considering it to be one of his animals. I will not offer a debate on what was possibly maybe going through his mind when he made this vow or how he kept it, because even Bible scholars are divided on this subject. Some believe that his daughter was literally sacrificed on an altar, while others believe that since human sacrifice is not something that God condoned, that his daughter was instead forever separated to life as a virgin, never marrying. And that was 1139. So this gave Japhath no inheritance or way of having grandchildren. Either way, whatever you believe, whatever sacrifice, whatever way that you believe in this, Japhath had to make a choice, and he had to make a choice to keep his word by sacrificing his daughter in a way that he had not planned for his family to be sacrificed. And this grieved him deeply. While he had many strengths, and it's even listed in Hebrews 1, which is the Hall of Fame chapter. We talk about this chapter, Hebrews 1, as being this amazing chapter where, literally they list all kinds of people throughout the course of history. He's listed in there, and he had weaknesses. And his vow, that he made in emotion was one of those weaknesses. So despite making this foolish vow, he took responsibility for his words and he kept the promise that he made. And he was a man who could be trusted. Do you keep your word despite how difficult it may be? When you make some kind of vow, or when you, promise to do something, even if it's in the height of emotions, do you still keep your word to that person? I mean, do your friends, do your children, coworkers, spouse, family members know that you can be trusted with your words regardless of the emotional state that you make them in? Or do you make excuses as to why you said the things and that you do not have to keep your past vows? I mean, do you make, excuses as to why you don't have to keep your word because you were in an emotional state? How well we take responsibility for what we say is a direct correlation of how much we can be trusted, and it bleeds into our personal integrity. God would much rather have our daily obedience to Him versus us making futuristic promises to Him driven by emotion. Obviously, all of us would. We would all want daily served by people that we love in the heart of a balanced emotion versus us having a heightened conversation and things are happening around us that are emotionally high, and then we make promises in that emotional high and then have to eat our words. When we keep our emotions at bay and focus on just daily obedience and daily living our lives, just as we are, emotions at bay, we just daily obey. Our words are going to be steadfast and steady. We're going to have, that moment where our lives are going to be exactly that, steadfast and steady. And this will minimize the vows that we may regret in the future. And this example, this story, case in point, he was a leader. He was listed in the Hall of Fame, but he made an emotional vow that transcended and revolutionized his family. And obviously he kept his word, but he regretted that vow. So today's challenge to dig deeper is to ask yourself the question: have you made a mistake of promising something that you regret, or making any kind of foolish vow, and now you must make the choice as to keep it and keep your word, or try and justify not keeping that word? And obviously, if you make a vow in the height of emotions and you say, I'm going to, call the cops on you, or something, silly like that, that's something totally different than if you are coming from a sincere place like Japheth. He was coming from a sincere place of really wanting to honor God, but what he didn't think about was, could something come out of, to greet me that is not my animals? Or could, thinking things through before we make vows is really the main message here. Making sure that we are emotionally steady and steadfast, and we're not making vows just from, this heightened emotion. Is there something that you've ever done like that, and you feel bad about it? Make it right with God today and commit to living each day focused on merely obeying God. I mean, if he was focused on that, just merely obeying God, God would have told him, go make a sacrifice to me and use one of your animals. Or he might have said something else. But he was trying to step ahead, probably, of God. I don't know. But scholars are even disagreement with what happened in that moment. And that's irrelevant, really. It's more or less focusing on just living a life of daily obedience, doing the things, every single day, and not making those promises that are in heightened emotion. I mean, make it right with God, especially if you've made a vow to God and you were in a heightened emotion and said, I'm going to, if you do this for me, I'm going to be doing this for you. And now you're stepping back in the calmness of your emotions and wondering, well, now what do I do? Well, make it right with God today and commit to living each day in obedience to God instead of making idle promises for the future out of emotion. And it's between you and God about that vow as to whether or not, he's going to, ask you to go ahead and keep your word on that, or something different. And that's between you and God. And Japheth, chose to be a man of integrity in that moment and keep his word, as hard as it was. And most likely his daughter was not very happy. I tend to take on the stance that um, he he was required and used or sacrificed, quote unquote, his daughter to live a life of servitude towards God and remain a virgin. I don't believe that he had to literally sacrifice her on the altar. That's the stance that I take. But again, scholars look at that and go, we're not sure. But when we look at that, the meat of the message today is to make sure that our word stands true regardless of whether or not we are in a heightened emotional situation or we are steadfast and steady. And that challenge is really to make sure that we get to a place where we can hold on to our emotion and be strong in our emotion and our words, and so that we don't use our words in ways that we would regret when we are calmer. And that is, the big thing. It's like, don't make emotional vows, because God may expect you to keep them regardless of whether or not he wanted you to. He may expect you to keep them because he wants your character and your integrity to remain steadfast as well. And again, Japheth went down in history and is listed in the Hall of Fame in Hebrews. So he is an example again. And I say this over and over again. The Bible is full of stories of real people who say things that they regret, who do things that they regret, who live a life that they've got to repent about and make things right with God. It's full of real people and real examples of things that they do that we can actually learn from and not do. So I don't want to make vows to God in an emotional state to where that, oh my goodness, I've got to make a choice as to whether to keep my word with God or go back on it and then potentially suffer other consequences as well. So in your evening reflection, when you're pulling out your journal and you're pondering today's devotion and pondering, have I ever made an emotional vow to God and or even to someone else that I need to make right with? What did you resolve today in your heart about that thing? What did you learn about today's lesson regarding keeping your word? Is it something that you can glean from? Is it something that you need to make right with? Did you make right with it today and resolve in your heart how you're going to progress forward? And have you become a little more aware of being careful what we say, especially in heightened emotional situations? Because we want to minimize vows from an emotional state, but we also want to minimize having to go back to people and say, you know what, I shouldn't have said that and I really didn't mean it, and I'm not going to do that thing. That isn't a great idea. So just make sure that you remember this and how it affected Japheth's household, and helping to minimize our emotional state and being careful what we say to God and to others, especially in those emotional states. And really, truly, I would venture to say for myself, I don't want to ever make an emotional vow. I don't want to ever make a promise when there's an emotional heightened situation that I'm having to, later reflect on and later combat on. So that's me. I want to minimize those situations down to a zero. And have I ever done this before? Yeah. Have I ever had to figure out, am I going to keep my word or not? Yeah. We want to just make sure that we're always looking to God and trying our very best when we make vows to other people and to God, that our emotions are steady and still, and that we've prayed on those. And, ultimately, like I said before, if he had not made that emotional vow to God in that emotional heightened, yay, excitement, he would have calmed down and maybe had a conversation with God of, how can I bless you, God, in this moment? And that conversation might have went a little different. So I hope today inspired you every single day to just continually move forward and getting closer and closer to God and fine tuning our mouths, our spirit man, our emotions. And hopefully every day we're getting closer and closer to, just uh, being on solid ground. Not that we're not right now, but even making our spirit man even more uh, strong and solid. And when these situations come up, please remember to not make emotional vows to God and to others. And hopefully, we minimize hurt and pain and chances for us to have to reflect again in the future. And until tomorrow, keep rinsing, reflecting, and repeating.